Hello, my name is Ben Duckett, and I want to tell you a little story about myself. It's a story about how I started learning English. You see, English wasn't always important to me. I used to live my life without thinking too much about it. But one day, everything changed. It all started when I was at work. I remember the moment clearly. I was sitting at my desk when my boss walked up to me with a new project. "Ben," he said, "we need you to help with our international clients. You'll need to communicate with them in English." My heart sank. English? I knew a few words, but I had never tried to have a full conversation in English. The thought made me nervous. Suddenly, I realized something very important. English is everywhere. It's not just at work. It's on TV. It's in music. It's on the internet. So many things I loved, movies, books, songs, they were in English, but I couldn't fully enjoy them because I didn't understand. At that moment, I knew I had to change. If I wanted to grow in my job, travel the world, and connect with more people, I needed to learn English. But there was one big problem. I didn't know where to start. I felt lost, confused, and a bit scared. I remember sitting down with a pen and notebook, staring at a blank page. How do people learn a new language? I thought. I didn't have a plan, and that made me frustrated. I would try to listen to English speakers, but the words moved too fast for me. They would say things like, "How's it going?" or "What's up?" And I couldn't even respond. I felt embarrassed. Even when I tried to read simple sentences, the meaning didn't make sense to me. It was like trying to solve a puzzle, but I didn't have all the pieces. I felt stuck, and I didn't know what to do next. At that point, I began asking myself some big questions. Could I really learn English? Was I too old to start? Would I ever be able to speak like those people I hear on TV? I wasn't sure. But one thing I knew for certain: if I wanted to succeed, I had to find a way to start learning. I couldn't let the fear of failure stop me. And that's where my journey began, a simple decision to try. After that moment at work, I started to see English in a completely different light. It was like my eyes had opened to a new world, and suddenly, I was noticing English everywhere. At first, I thought it was just for work, but the more I looked around, the more I realized how important it was in every part of life. In school, I remember my teachers telling us how English was the global language. Back then, I didn't pay much attention. I thought, why would I need to learn English? I don't plan on traveling anywhere far. But now, I see how wrong I was. English is not just a language you use when you travel to another country. It's the language of business, education, and even entertainment. Let me tell you about my job. I work in a company that deals with clients from all over the world. And guess what? Most of them speak English. It didn't matter if they were from Europe, Asia, or even South America. Everyone communicated in English. The meetings, the emails, the phone calls, it was all in English. I used to sit there in meetings, trying to pick up a few words here and there, but it was frustrating. I couldn't understand what was happening, and I felt left out. But it wasn't just at work. English was everywhere. I noticed it when I scrolled through social media. Most of the posts, captions, and even funny videos were in English. People from all over the world were connected through this one language, and here I was, missing out. I couldn't join in the conversations because I didn't know how to express myself in English. It didn't stop there. My favorite movies? English. My favorite songs? English. Some of the books I wanted to read? You guessed it. English. Everything I enjoyed, everything I wanted to understand better, seemed to be locked behind this language I couldn't fully speak or understand. It was like standing outside a party, hearing the laughter and conversations inside, but not being able to join. That's when it hit me. English is the key. It's the key to so many doors. Better opportunities at work, more ways to connect with people, and even the ability to enjoy the things I love. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that English wasn't just another subject to learn. It was a tool that could change my life. If I learned English, I could open myself up to new experiences and new opportunities. I knew that if I wanted to grow in my career, English was non-negotiable. I had seen colleagues who could speak English getting more opportunities, traveling for work, attending important meetings, and taking on leadership roles. I wanted that too. I didn't want to feel limited anymore. I didn't want to feel like I had to rely on others to translate for me. I wanted to be the one who could stand up and speak confidently in any situation. But it wasn't just about work. I started thinking about how English could help me outside of the office. What if I wanted to travel one day? I had always dreamed of visiting new places, seeing new cultures, and meeting new people. But how could I do that if I couldn't communicate with anyone? English would make it possible for me to travel the world and not feel lost. Even on a personal level, I wanted to be able to communicate better with people online. I saw people from different countries sharing their thoughts, ideas, and experiences on social media, but I couldn't join in. Learning English would allow me to be a part of these global conversations. I could make friends from all over the world, share my own ideas, and understand theirs. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that learning English wasn't just about one part of my life. It was about improving my life as a whole. English wasn't just useful for my job, it was useful for everything I wanted to do, whether it was watching a movie, reading a book, talking to someone online, or traveling to a new place. English was the bridge that would connect me to all of those things. So, I made a decision. A very important decision. I decided that I was going to learn English. Not because someone else told me to, but because I knew it would make my life better. I wanted to understand the world better. I wanted to grow. I wanted to be able to communicate with people from different places. I wanted to feel confident in any situation, whether I was speaking in a meeting or chatting with someone online. This wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. Learning a new language takes time, patience, and a lot of hard work. But the more I thought about the benefits, the more determined I became. I told myself, Ben, you can do this. You can learn English and open up a whole new world of possibilities. And that's how my journey began. It wasn't just about learning a few words or memorizing some grammar rules. It was about changing my future one step at a time. Learning English became my goal, and I knew that if I kept working at it, I would get there. It was time to take the first step. Once I made the decision to learn English, I knew I needed a plan. I couldn't just jump in without knowing where I was going. I needed goals, clear, simple goals that would help me stay focused and motivated. So, I sat down with a notebook and started thinking about what I really wanted to achieve with my English learning. The first thing I knew I wanted was to understand basic English conversations. You know, those everyday chats that people have when they meet each other or talk on the phone. Things like saying hello, asking someone how they are, or ordering food at a restaurant. I wanted to be able to listen to someone speak in English and actually understand what they were saying. I imagined myself in a cafe, listening to a simple conversation between two people. "Hi, how are you?" "I'm good, thanks. What about you?" "I'm doing well. What would you like to drink?" It sounds simple, right? But for me, at that time, it felt like a big challenge. I wanted to be able to follow along without feeling lost or confused. That became my first goal, to understand basic English conversations. I knew that once I could do that, everything else would start to make sense. Next, I set another important goal. I wanted to be able to speak English confidently. I didn't just want to learn a few words and phrases. I wanted to be able to have a real conversation. I wanted to speak English without feeling nervous or afraid of making mistakes. I wanted to be able to ask questions, share my thoughts, and express my ideas clearly in English. I remember thinking about how I always admired people who could switch between languages so easily. They would start a conversation in their own language and then seamlessly switch to English without a second thought. That's what I wanted for myself. I wanted to be able to join conversations, whether it was at work, with friends, or even with strangers, and speak English confidently. I wanted to feel proud of my progress, not embarrassed by my mistakes. But I knew that speaking English confidently wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time and practice. That's why I made this one of my main goals, to speak English confidently, one step at a time. I promised myself that I would practice every day, even if it was just a few sentences, until I felt comfortable. The last goal I set for myself was to improve my English reading and writing skills over time. Now, this wasn't as urgent as the other two, but I knew that reading and writing were just as important in the long run. I wanted to be able to read simple books and articles in English. I wanted to understand signs, menus, and instructions without needing to translate everything. I even dreamed of one day reading novels in English, but I knew that was a goal for the future. As for writing, I wanted to be able to write simple emails, texts, and messages in English without feeling stressed. I didn't need to write long essays or anything complicated at the start. I just wanted to get comfortable with short, simple sentences. If I could write, "How are you?" and "What time is the meeting?" without struggling, I would already be making progress. Over time, I knew my writing would improve, just like my speaking and listening. Setting these goals made me feel motivated. For the first time, learning English didn't seem like an impossible task. It was something I could achieve if I broke it down into smaller steps. These goals gave me a clear direction, and I knew that if I worked hard, I would reach them. With these goals in mind, I was ready to begin my journey. I knew it wouldn't always be easy, but with a plan in place, I felt like I could tackle the challenges ahead. All I had to do was take the first step. Once I had my goals set, I knew it was time to take action. But where should I start? Learning a whole new language felt overwhelming at first, but I remembered one piece of advice I had heard before. Start small. Don't try to learn everything at once. So I decided to begin with the basics, simple words and phrases that I could use in everyday situations. The first words I learned were the most common ones, the ones people use all the time. I started with hello. It was such a simple word, but it's how most conversations begin. I practiced saying hello over and over again, making sure I was pronouncing it correctly. I would stand in front of the mirror, say hello, and imagine I was greeting someone. It felt a little silly at first, but I knew this was important. After hello, I moved on to other basic words. Thank you was next. I realized that showing gratitude is a big part of English conversations, and thank you is something I could use everywhere, at work, in shops, with friends. Every time someone helped me or did something kind, I made it a habit to say, thank you. At first, it felt a little awkward, but soon it became natural. Then I learned, please. I noticed that in English, politeness is key. People say, please, when they ask for something, whether it's big or small. I practiced using please when I ordered food or asked for help. Even if I was just practicing in my head, I would think, can I have a coffee, please? Or, could you help me with this, please? Yes and no were two other important words that I focused on. These are the simplest ways to answer questions in English, and they come up all the time in conversations. I made sure I could say them confidently and clearly. Whenever someone asked me something, even in my own language, I would think about how I would answer it in English, yes or no. These words may seem small, but they were powerful. I started using them every day, even in short conversations. At the grocery store, I would greet the cashier with a simple, hello. If someone helped me find something, I'd make sure to say, thank you. When I wanted something, I always added please to my request. I even practiced saying yes and no out loud when I was alone, just to get used to the sound of my own voice speaking English. But I didn't stop there. I started putting these words together into basic phrases. I learned how to say, hello, how are you? And I'm fine, thank you. These were simple, everyday phrases that I knew would help me get through basic conversations. Every morning, I would greet myself in the mirror with, hello, how are you? I even tried it out with my coworkers, and it felt great to see them smile and respond back to me. I remember the first time I successfully used these words and phrases in a real conversation. I was at a cafe ordering a coffee. I walked up to the counter, smiled at the barista, and said, hello, can I have a coffee, please? She smiled and said, sure, what kind of coffee would you like? I wasn't sure how to answer that yet, but just being able to say that first sentence in English gave me so much confidence. Practicing these words every day helped me build a strong foundation. I would repeat them out loud while walking, driving, or even while watching TV. I made it a habit to use them as often as I could. Slowly but surely, I started feeling more comfortable speaking these simple words and phrases. They became part of my daily routine, and the more I used them, the more natural they felt. These small steps, learning how to say hello, thank you, please, and yes, no, were the building blocks of my English learning journey. They were simple, but they opened the door to bigger conversations. By focusing on these words first, I was giving myself the tools to start communicating in English, even if it was just a few words at a time. And with each new word I learned, I felt a little more confident. I knew that if I kept practicing these simple words and phrases, soon I would be ready for more. But for now, I was happy with my progress. I was taking my first steps toward speaking English, and that felt like a victory. Once I felt more comfortable with some basic words and phrases, I knew it was time to take my learning a step further. I wanted to get used to how English actually sounded in real conversations. That's when I decided to focus on listening. I didn't expect to understand everything right away, but I knew that just hearing English would help me get familiar with the language. I started listening to English podcasts. At first, I chose podcasts made for beginners, where the hosts spoke slowly and clearly. They talked about simple topics like daily routines or going shopping, which was perfect for me. I would put on my headphones and listen while I did other things, like walking to work or cooking dinner. Even if I didn't catch every word, I found that just hearing the rhythm and sounds of English helped a lot. There was one phrase that kept coming up in these podcasts. How are you? Every time I heard it, I would repeat it out loud. How are you? It seemed like such a common question, and I wanted to be able to respond. I practiced saying it over and over again, making sure I got the pronunciation right. Another phrase I heard a lot was, I am fine. It was the typical response to, how are you? So I knew it was important. Every time I heard it in a podcast, I would repeat it to myself, I am fine. These simple sentences became my practice. I would pause the podcast, say the sentence, and then play it again to see if I was saying it correctly. I also started listening to English songs. Music was a fun way to learn because even though I didn't understand all the lyrics, I could still enjoy the melody and pick up new words here and there. I would listen to a song and try to catch any familiar words or phrases. Sometimes I would hear something like thank you or goodbye and feel excited that I recognized it. The more I listened, the more I felt connected to the language. Listening to English every day, whether through podcasts or music, helped me get used to how the language sounds. I began to notice patterns in the way people spoke, the way their voices went up and down when they asked a question, or how they used certain words in different situations. This listening practice became a key part of my learning routine. Even though I couldn't understand everything, I knew I was training my brain to get used to the sounds of English. Now that I was listening to English and learning new phrases, it was time to put them into practice. I realized that it wasn't enough to just learn words. I had to use them every day to really improve. So, I made it my goal to practice speaking English whenever I could, even if it was just for a few minutes a day. The first place I started was with myself. Every morning, when I got ready for the day, I would look in the mirror and say something in English. It could be as simple as, "Good morning, how are you today?" or "I am ready for work." At first, it felt strange talking to myself in English, but I knew that this was helping me build my confidence. The more I practiced, the easier it became to form sentences in my head. I also tried to use English when talking to my friends. Some of my friends were learning English too, so we would practice together. Instead of saying hello in our own language, we would greet each other with, "Hi, how are you?" Sometimes we would even have short conversations in English, talking about simple things like what we were going to eat for lunch or how our day was going. These small conversations made a big difference in my progress. Another thing I did was read English signs whenever I saw them. Whether I was at a store, a cafe, or walking down the street, I would look for signs written in English and try to understand what they meant. Even if it was something as basic as exit or restroom, I would make a mental note of the word and practice saying it to myself. Reading English in the real world helped me connect the words I was learning with everyday life. I even started writing simple notes in English. If I needed to remind myself to do something, instead of writing it in my own language, I would write it in English. Buy milk. Call mom. These small notes helped me practice my writing skills and made me feel like I was really using the language in a practical way. The more I used English in my daily life, the more comfortable I became. It didn't matter if I wasn't perfect. I knew that practice made me better. Every time I used a new word or phrase, I was making progress. Whether it was talking to friends, reading signs, or writing notes, I found ways to bring English into my everyday routine. By using English every day, I realized that the language was starting to feel less foreign to me. It was becoming a part of my life, and I knew that with time, I would continue to get better. I wasn't just learning English in theory, I was living it, and that made all the difference. As I got more comfortable with speaking and listening, I realized that I still had a lot to learn. There were many times when I didn't know the meaning of a word, or I couldn't figure out how to say something in English. That's when I discovered how useful asking for help and using tools could be. I started using online tools like dictionaries and language apps. Whenever I came across a new word, I would look it up in an English dictionary app on my phone. The app not only showed me the meaning of the word, but also how to pronounce it. I would repeat the word out loud, trying to match the pronunciation. I also used translation apps, but I tried not to rely on them too much because I wanted to think in English, not just translate everything. One of the most helpful tools I found was a language learning app. This app had short lessons that helped me practice new words and grammar. It would quiz me on vocabulary, show me pictures to match with words, and let me practice speaking by repeating sentences. It became part of my daily routine to spend at least 15 minutes on the app, learning something new every day. But I knew that apps and dictionaries weren't enough. Sometimes, I needed to ask for help from real people. Luckily, I had a few friends who were fluent in English. Whenever I didn't understand something, I wasn't afraid to ask them questions. For example, if I didn't know how to use a certain word in a sentence, I would ask, "How do I use this word?" Or, "Can you explain this sentence to me?" My friends were always happy to help, and they explained things in a way that made sense to me. They would even give me tips on pronunciation or suggest new words that I could learn. I realized that asking questions was one of the best ways to learn faster. The more questions I asked, the more I understood. I wasn't shy about asking for help because I knew it was part of the learning process. I also joined an online English learning group where people from different countries practiced speaking and writing together. We would chat in English, share tips, and correct each other's mistakes. This group became a great source of motivation for me, and I learned a lot by interacting with others who were also learning. The combination of using online tools and asking for help from friends really helped me improve my English. I felt like I had a solid support system, and whenever I faced a challenge, I knew there were resources and people I could turn to. Once I had some confidence in speaking and listening, I knew it was time to work on my reading and writing skills. I wanted to be able to read books, articles, and messages in English without feeling lost. And I also wanted to improve my writing so I could express my thoughts clearly. I started by reading short, simple books in English. I didn't jump into difficult novels right away. Instead, I found books for beginners that had easy vocabulary and short sentences. These books often came with pictures, which helped me understand the story even if I didn't know all the words. One of the first books I read was a short story about a boy and his dog. The sentences were simple, like, "The boy loves his dog," and "They play in the park." As I read, I would underline any words I didn't know and look them up later. Slowly, I began to recognize more and more words, and reading became less of a struggle. I also started reading articles online. I would look for news websites that offered simple English news, and I would try to read at least one article a day. At first, I had to look up a lot of words, but over time, I found myself understanding more without needing to check the dictionary. Reading regularly helped me see how words were used in context, and it improved my vocabulary. To work on my writing, I began keeping a small notebook where I would write short sentences every day. At first, I wrote very simple things, like, "Today I went to the store," or "I like to eat pizza." The point wasn't to write something long or complicated. It was just to get used to forming sentences in English. As I practiced more, I started to write longer sentences and even short paragraphs about my day or my thoughts. I also tried to write messages to my friends in English. Instead of texting them in my native language, I would write short messages like, "How are you?" or "What are you doing this weekend?" These small conversations helped me practice my writing skills in a real-world setting, and my friends would correct me if I made any mistakes. One of the most exciting moments for me was when I noticed that my reading and writing were really improving. I could now read simple books and articles without feeling frustrated, and my writing had become clearer. I could express my thoughts in English, even if it was just a few sentences at a time. Seeing this progress made me feel proud of myself. It reminded me that learning a language is a journey, and every small step I took was helping me get closer to my goal. Whether it was reading a short story or writing a note in my notebook, each bit of practice was helping me become better at English. Even though I was making progress, there were definitely times when I felt frustrated. Learning English wasn't always easy. Sometimes, no matter how much I practiced, I would still get stuck. There were moments when I couldn't remember the right words or I would hear something in English and not understand a single word. It felt overwhelming at times. There were days when I would sit down to study and feel like I wasn't improving at all. I'd listen to podcasts, and the words would blur together, or I'd try to write something and end up staring at the page, unsure of what to say. Sometimes I felt like giving up. I wondered if I would ever really be able to speak English fluently. But in those moments, I reminded myself that learning a language is a process. It's not something that happens overnight. I thought back to when I started, when even the simplest words were new to me. I realized that even though I still had a lot to learn, I had already come a long way. I could now have basic conversations, read simple books, and understand more than I did before. I knew that feeling frustrated was normal. It was just part of the journey. Whenever I felt stuck, I would take a break, then come back and try again the next day. I learned to be patient with myself and to celebrate the small wins, even if they didn't seem like much at the time. Sometimes I would look at my notebook and see how much I had written in English. I would think about the words I had learned, the sentences I could now say, and how far I had come. This gave me the motivation to keep going. I realized that persistence was the key. I wasn't going to give up, no matter how hard it got, because I knew that every bit of effort I put in was making me better. After months of practice, I started to see real progress. I could now have basic conversations in English without feeling lost. When I went to the store, I could ask for what I needed in English. I could understand simple questions and respond with confidence. Even when I made mistakes, I didn't feel embarrassed anymore. I just corrected myself and kept going. I was also able to read more easily. Simple books and articles no longer felt like a struggle, and I could write short paragraphs about my day or my thoughts. My vocabulary had grown, and I felt more comfortable with the language. It was a great feeling to see how far I had come. Speaking English became a part of my daily life. Whether I was talking to friends, reading something online, or writing notes, I was using English in ways I never thought I could before. I felt proud of myself for sticking with it, and I knew that the hard work had paid off. But more than just the language itself, learning English gave me confidence. I could now communicate in a language that is spoken all over the world. It opened new doors for me, whether it was in social situations, at work, or even when traveling. I felt like I could connect with more people and explore new opportunities. Now that I had reached this point, I wanted to encourage others who were starting their own English learning journey. I would tell them, start small, practice every day, and you will improve. Learning a language takes time and effort, but every bit of practice makes a difference. Even when it feels hard, don't give up. Keep going, because one day you'll look back and see just how far you've come. If I could do it, anyone can. The key is to stay patient and persistent. Learning English is a journey, and each step you take will bring you closer to your goal. Just remember to keep practicing, ask for help when you need it, and most importantly, believe in yourself.